hope you're having a great weekend. My name is Dan. I'm one of the pastors here at Parker Hill, and we're going to continue this series that we've been going through this entire summer called Jesus On, where we're looking at Jesus' most famous and most complete teaching in the Bible, his most famous sermon called the Sermon on the Mount. And so we've been looking at what Jesus has to say on different topics like happiness and influence, sex, anger, prayer. And so I'm glad you're joining us today, whether you're joining us by way of video in Dixon City, Wilkes-Barre, or online, or you're just checking us out for the very first time in the room. I'm glad that you're joining us, and I'm hoping that you take to heart what we're about to talk about today, because if you do make the shift that we're about to talk about, it will change all of your relationships. See, when we kicked off this series, I shared a quote with you that I think summarizes Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And this is the idea, if you were to follow Jesus, you would learn that Jesus makes life better and makes you better at life. And what we're talking about today will definitely make you better at life. And so we're going to look at the next part of Jesus' message in Matthew 7 through 12. But we're going to start in verse 12, and then we're going to go back up and see what led up to that verse. So here's verse 12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Jesus is saying if you could take everything that God has to say about human relationships and you were to distill it down into its essence, this would be it. So don't miss this. This is, without a doubt, one of Jesus' most famous sentences. In fact, it is so widespread and well known that we gave it a name. It's called the Golden Rule. And what's interesting is that other spiritual leaders said things that were similar to this even before Jesus, like Confucius, 500 years before Christ, who said, "Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire." Or Buddha, 400 years before Christ, "Hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful." Or Rabbi Hillel, 20 years before Christ, who says, "What is hateful to yourself, do to no other." Or this Greek philosopher who was 40 years after Jesus, he says, "What you avoid suffering yourself, do not inflict on others." But I want you to notice something. There's a difference between these words and the words of Jesus, between the spiritual leaders and what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7. Do you see the difference? Go ahead and turn to a neighbor nearby and tell them what the difference is between these spiritual leaders and Jesus. Go. Some of you have an idea. That's right. Every other teacher taught this principle from a negative perspective. Basically saying, do not do something to someone else that you don't want them to do to you. This is very different. That negative bent, that negative version makes it so that you could be pretty passive in life. You could just say, as long as I'm not hurting someone else, I can do whatever I want. But Jesus, he comes along and he states the same principle in the positive. And in doing so, he raises the standard for us. And he says, I want you to take initiative. I want you to be proactive. I want you to go out there, and it's not about what you don't do, it's about what you do for others. See, the golden rule goes beyond stop hurting people and raises the bar, going all the way to start helping people. And so, for instance, if you were to, apply the principle at work in the negative view, you'd say, well, let me kind of put myself in my boss's shoes, and okay, if I was a boss, I wouldn't want my employees to steal from me, so I wouldn't steal. And so you're defining it by what you would not do. But if you were to apply the golden rule in the same circumstance, you would say, well, if I were a boss, I would want my employees to give their best effort and do their jobs with good attitude, so I'm going to do that. Defining how you treat your boss by what you do. For instance, if you were to come home at the end of the day and kind of look at it negatively, you say, well, if I was a kid, I wouldn't want my parents to yell at me, so I'm not going to yell at my kids. And define it by how you treat someone by what you don't do. But if you were to apply the golden rule, you'd come home at the end of the day and you'd say, well, I'd want a dad that would play with me and interact with me and teach me things, read me stories. And so I will take time to play with my children. If it's a group of friends, you might say, well, if I was someone's friend, I wouldn't want them to gossip about me, so I'm not going to do it. So I won't do that, right, in the negative. But if you're thinking of a group of friends in the gossip and you want to apply this golden rule, you would say, well, if I was someone's friend, I would want them to initiate some things, to check on me, to care about what's going on in my life, to ask some questions. So I'm going to reach out in my relationships. See, what Jesus is telling us to do is to put ourselves in the shoes of someone else and to look at the life from their perspective and then to take action to do something, not just don't do something. This is the golden rule. So in my family, one of the things that we do to get conversation going around the dinner table is what we call highs and lows. So we go around the table and we share something good from the day, that's the high, something bad from the day, that's the low. And so we're one big family here, and let's share a little bit. So what I want you to do is I want you to share a highlight from your summer, a great day, a great experience, a great memory. So when I say go, I want you to turn to someone and share a highlight with them. It could be a vacation at the beach. It might be that you got a raise or promotion at work. It might be hanging out one last time before heading off to college. Whatever it is, I want you to turn to someone nearby and tell them your highlight. Go ahead. Yeah, sounds like you had a good summer, right? One of the highlights from my summer was that my family went to Knoebels Amusement Resort for the first time. This is one of my kids just having a great time. He rode this ride like 7 times in a row, so he just loved it. We rode roller coasters. We got drenched by that water ride. We had a ton of fun together, hanging out with friends and making memories as a family. So this was definitely a highlight for me from the summer. But now let's talk about lows. And I'm not going to ask you to turn to a neighbor and share a low, but I'm going to share one with you. You see, quite honestly, in my life, I can be so impatient with the people closest to me. I can give my kids some direction, and the next second they're doing the opposite thing, and so I can give them this intense look. Or they can repeat a mistake, and my response can be too forceful. And I know that when I do that, I hurt their little hearts with my impatient reactions. And those are low moments for me. And in my life, I've learned that one of the most important questions I can ask, a question that can give me so much clarity and provide so much motivation, is not, what do I want to be said about me when I die? Though that's a great question. That's a powerful question. But by taking that question, I found one that actually changes my behavior. And I take this question and I tighten it up and shrink the timeline a little bit. And the question that I ask is this: what do I want to be true of this chapter when it's over? You see, this question keeps the end in sight. You're not standing like at the far end of your life trying to look back and imagine it all. That's like too much to process sometimes. Instead, I'm thinking about the chapter or season of life that I'm in right now, and I'm asking myself, when this is over, what would make me want to do over? You see, before coming to Parker Hill, I was a student pastor, and so I saw a lot of goodbyes as kids graduated. I interacted with parents who were dropping their kids off at college or helping them pack up and move out into their next phase of life. And I watched them do this process, and I realized that there are some things that you just want to be true by the time your child leaves home, by the time the chapter is over. You will have wished that you had instilled a sincere faith in them, that you had equipped them for independence, that you built a relationship with them that could mature and then flourish, that you'd given them a sense of their value, convinced them that they are loved, that you'd shown them what it's like to make good decisions in life, and so on. There are things that you want to be true when the season of life is over. And so I can tell you that when I look into the eyes of my kids, after being too harsh with them, I can tell you that this is not what I want to be true of this chapter of our lives. And I think if you were to answer this question for yourself, no matter what chapter you find yourself in, I think we'd all have the same answer. There'd be different details, of course, but at the bottom line, it would be this: I hope that I had lived out love. I hope that I had lived the golden rule. I hope that I had lived out love for others. Ultimately, that's truly the best way to live. So after you graduate, you hope that you lived out love to your classmates. And after a relationship ends, I hope I had lived out love for that boyfriend or girlfriend. Or after you leave the job, I hope I had lived out love for my coworkers. Looking back with even a little bit of God's perspective on a season of your life, you realize, I wish that I'd chosen the best thing, that I had lived out love to others. That's the golden rule. And when you follow it, it makes your life incredibly rich because following Jesus makes life better and makes you better at life. And how awesome would it be if this golden rule were the one principle that you use to guide your life, to increasingly be full of love for the people around you? Can you just imagine it? At the end of the chapter, looking back and saying, like, I didn't do it perfectly, but I did love. At the end of vacation, saying, I didn't wound others, I made wonderful memories. At the end of a dating relationship, saying, I protected their heart instead of broke it. At the end of a job, having them sad to see you go instead of eager counting down the days. At the end of a loved one's time here on earth, you didn't have regrets of words left unsaid and adventures left unlived. At the end of time spent in one home before you move into another, walking through those rooms, thinking about all the things that God gave you to do, not just not to do, and how you did them. If you have kids, by the end of grade school, giving your kids an unshakable confidence in God's love instead of a shaky commitment to faith. By the end of middle school, a profound sense of their value instead of making them wonder if they matter. By the end of high school, your kids enjoying you so much that they don't want to go anywhere but live in the basement with you, you know? No, not that last one. Not that last one. But can I be honest with you? This golden rule, I have another name for it. The golden rule? How about the impossible rule? Because love sounds so great, doesn't it? That sounded fantastic. Living a life like that's so wonderful. But if you're honest, and if you're anything like me, you're at least a little bit selfish. You know, that's what impatience is. You're interrupting my plan for my life, and why are you getting in my way? I'm selfish. See, most of us know the right thing to do. Many of us even know the best thing to do, but I don't think I'm alone with this. We all struggle with doing that thing, of living this out. And so for many of us, the golden rule is beautiful, but it often feels impossible. And I think it would be the impossible rule, except for something really, really significant. Look at that verse that we read at the beginning again. It says, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. That little word right there is awesome. Because that little word tells us that this high standard, this way of life, this beautiful rule for us is tied to something. So is there because, therefore, it's tied to what came before. And in this case, it's tied to a promise that will unlock this kind of love in us. So let's go back to the beginning of the paragraph and learn how to love like this. Verse 7 says, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. This is a promise. Jesus makes a big promise here. Actually, he bundles 6 of them together into one big promise. Ask, it'll be given to you. That's a promise. You will find. That's a promise. It'll be open to you. That's a promise. You'll receive. You'll find. It will be opened. 6, one right after the other. This repetition meant to convince us that Jesus really means it when he says this. This is a promise. Do you have someone in your life that's really good at keeping promises? Someone who'd rather die than break their word. The kind of person whose word is their bond. And if they promise it, like nothing is going to keep them from keeping that promise. We call people like that men of their word, women of their word, because you can completely trust what they say when they say it to you. And our God is a God of his word. You can trust what he says, and if he said it, you can count on it. Nothing will keep him from keeping this promise to you. This promise times 6. He means it. So let's unpack this promise a little bit. There are 3 aspects of this promise that I want you to take note of right away, and the first is this, is that it's continual. It's continual. The words here in the original language are present participles, which just means that it's an idea of ongoing asking, seeking, knocking. Asking, seeking, knocking. It's continual. So everyone who keeps asking receives. And everyone who keeps seeking finds. And everyone who keeps knocking, the door will be opened. So you don't ask once and then you're done. You don't seek a little bit and then you give up. You don't knock once and then shrug it off, say, I guess no one's home. You do this like my kids. I love my kids. And my kids are my favorite people on the planet. But sometimes they annoy me, all right? You see, if they want to play video games or they want to go to the park or they're bored, they let me know. And they come up to me and they tell me what they really, really want. And I usually give them an answer. And then they come back and they tell me what they really, really want. Again and again and again and again and again and again. What are you doing? And then one day I realized as they did that they're asking me because they believe I love them and that I have the power to change their circumstance. I thought, God, do I believe that about you? Do I come to you like that because I believe you love me and you got the power to change my circumstances? James 4:2 says, you do not have because you do not ask God. Sometimes I think my kids teach me more than I teach them. Be persistent like a kid with his parents. That's the kind of prayer that Jesus is describing here. So first, it's continual, persistent. Second, it's conditional. Like, if you don't do something, nothing happens. If you do X, God will do Y. So when you ask, it's tied to receiving, but without asking, there's no receiving. And when you seek, you'll find. When you knock, the door will be open to you. And so this is not a passive promise where you just sit back and let God hit you with it. Instead, it requires you to go after it. It's conditional. And third, it's universal. Look again at verse 8. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And the one who knocks, the door will be opened. For everyone who does this. For everyone. See, there's those of you who listen to messages like this, and you're like, wow, that's cool. God's awesome. Man, he's really cool. I guess he does do that for someone else. Like maybe for those super Christians or those highly dedicated and disciplined people, but not for me, not for a normal person. See, Jesus is saying, hey, no. Let me be 100% clear with you that this promise, it's for everyone. And so it's continual. It's not something you do once and you're done. It's conditional. You have to go after it to get the results. And it's universal. It is for you. And wow, the results are like big. There's a huge promise payoff here. Asking, receiving, seeking, finding, knocking, and a door being opened. It works. So once you hear that, you're like, is this like a blank check? Like, if I just keep praying like this, I'm going to get what I want? And so Jesus goes on like this in verse 9. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? And if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give gifts to those who ask him? So, in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. See, this broad promise is not a blank check. It's actually tied to two things, and these two things give you the parameters, they give you the guardrails of what to expect from God. And the first thing that is tied to, that this promise is hooked onto very tight, is the fatherhood of God. See, a few weeks ago, we talked about prayer and Jesus teaching us how to pray. And we said that when Jesus started that prayer, he set it up a certain way so that we would remember who we are addressing when we pray. And so he started it like this: Our Father in heaven. See, the most important thing that we can keep in mind when we're interacting with God is that he is a good dad. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Some poetic language there. Everything good in your life came down from a good dad. And he doesn't change his mind. There's no shifting shadows, no turning. He doesn't waver in his affection for you. And so Jesus says, when you're asking, seeking, and knocking, you need to remember this, that your dad in heaven is a good dad. Come on, he says, like what dad would give his son a stone instead of bread? I mean, what normal dad refused to give his kids what he needs physically to provide? What dad would give his kid a snake, all right, instead of a fish? What normal dad would give kids something that would hurt them? The obvious answer is, like in the majority of dads that you know and I know, is that they'll provide for their kids and they won't give them stuff that will really hurt them. That's just what dads do. And then Jesus makes his point, and he says, well, how much better of a dad is God? Like, if you can give good gifts and withhold bad ones, how well can your Heavenly Father handle things? In fact, I think I often love my kids more than they love themselves. There's things that, even though they ask for them and they think they really want them, I won't give it to them if it will hurt them. And if I can do that, broken as I am, how much better our Father in heaven. Pastor Tim Keller put it this way: we can be sure our prayers are answered precisely in the way that we would want them to be answered if we knew everything that God knows. He's a good dad. He just sees more. Or, if this is more your thing, let me quote another great intellectual of our time, Garth Brooks, who said, sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. And some of God's greatest gifts are those unanswered prayers. So this promise is not a blank check because it's tied and tethered to God's heart for you. But second, it's tied to the golden rule. Remember that this promise comes before the golden rule on purpose. So, in everything, promise, then the golden rule, which means that God is promising to give you what you need to love others. So let's put the pieces together. The golden rule is beautiful. Without God, the golden rule is impossible. But then he promises to give us what we need to love like that if we will ask him for it. So I was just going to summarize everything that Jesus is saying here in one sentence. If at the end of this chapter of your life, if you want to be more loving, keep asking and God will keep providing. Keep asking and God will keep providing. This is a huge promise. If I ask, seek, and knock, God will give me what I need to love others. If you want it, he will give you the kind of love that makes a mark on the people around you. It's available for the taking, but you have to go after it. I mean, how awesome would it be if this one principle guided your life? What if you were increasingly, if you're increasingly full of love for those around you? And you just imagine at the end of, end of the chapter, looking back and saying, I didn't do it perfectly, but I did, but I did love. At the end of the vacation, you didn't wound others, but you had these wonderful memories. Sorry, excuse me. How many of you guys are shouting inside for me to drink some of this water? Right? How many of you just felt like you were watching a train wreck happen? How many of you are like, isn't that like a huge bottle of water right there? Is he blind? You're hurting us. Please, take a drink. And I wonder if God isn't looking at us sometimes with this available resource right next to us and going, hello? Like, why are you trying to power through in love in this circumstance? Why are you just pushing through? Like, why don't you just ask for the love that you need right now? Why don't you just reach out to the resource available to you? What are you doing? Like, are you drained at work? Are you frustrated by a friend? Are you wounded by someone's words? Are you just tired? Don't complicate it. Stop and ask. Ask, seek, and knock. If you want to be more loving, keep asking, and God will keep providing. So what do we do with this truth today? Well, here's my challenge to you, a suggestion from one selfish person to maybe others. I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about one person or one situation. Think about your life and then ask the question, what do I want to be true when this chapter is over? And so to get you thinking, I want to share a couple from my own life, one where I did all right, the other one where I didn't do so great. My sophomore year of college probably should have been like the best year of my life. Turned out to be one of the hardest. Some of that I just brought on myself. I was rooming with one of my best friends. We were both training for ministry. We shared a lot of the same passions, and you would think that living together, we would have just fed off of each other, encouraged one another, and just had the time of our lives. But instead, really, we passed like ships in the night most of the time, and it was my fault. And so when I hit the last week of that year, it hit me. And I realized how much I had just missed by being caught up in my own struggles. The chapter was over and I couldn't change it. And so maybe you have one more year in high school. What do you want to be true of this chapter when it's over? On the flip side, as a student pastor, like I said, I got this front row seat to all these goodbyes between parents and their kids. And so when we had our kids, my wife and I, we just made this commitment that we would treasure the time that we had with our kids. Like we wouldn't rush it, we wouldn't wish it away, we would just savor the moments with them. And so we put up these little signs around the house, little reminders for us not to wish it away. And just last week, we were kind of flipping through some photo albums going way back, and we were looking at those pictures, and we kind of looked at each other, and we're like, we didn't do it all right, but we didn't rush that. Like, we didn't wish it away. I'm so glad we did that that's true about that chapter of our lives. And so maybe you're a parent. Don't wish away the stage that you're in. Ask yourself what you want to be true of this time when the chapter is over. So think about a situation or a person, a tough job situation, living a single life, where your family might be right now, a boss, a coworker, a younger sibling, a parent, a classmate, a neighbor, the person in front of you in traffic, and then start asking. Like, just go after it. Just reach out for it. Start asking for the love that you need, not just to not do what you shouldn't do, but to do what you would love to do. What would be great for them? What would propel them in God's direction? What would bring life to the people around you? Start asking. Access the promised resource so that you be known as someone who treats others like you would want to be treated. See, if you want to be more loving, keep asking and God will keep providing. And maybe I could just make one very obvious suggestion for you. You heard earlier about the opportunity to sponsor a child in Kenya or Haiti, to give them an education that will change the course of their lives. And I love what we're doing in places like Kenya and Haiti because it's truly changing lives. Like, we get to go over and see it with our own eyes and see the results of your generosity. And so personally, when I answer the question, what do I want to be true about this chapter of my life? I'll just tell you, I want my kids to see me caring about people outside of our home, outside of our space, outside of people that could pay me back. And I want to see what generosity looks like so they grow up to be like that too. And so what better way to grow in your love for other people than to head out in the lobby today and learn about sponsoring a child. As we wrap up today, we're going to sing a final song, and there's a line in this song that I love. It's a prayer, an asking, a seeking, a knocking. A prayer asking God to lead me into love for those around me. And that song can be the start of a new you. That song can be the beginning of a more loving you. This is your chance to start asking. And no matter where you find yourself in life today, no matter what tricky situation or relationship you find yourself in, no matter what you're facing when you walk through these doors, the invitation of God is to come. The door is wide open. You have open access as his child, and he wants you to come and pray. And so if you want to be more loving, keep asking, and God will keep providing. Please watch this with me.